Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Okay, so this episode of Attack of the Killer Garage Sale is, well, it's essentially the episode is kind of a growing episode for Danny, because this is an episode where he is technically, for all of about 5 seconds, popular and doesn't treat his friends all that well because of it. But also in this episode, as a direct result of Danny wanting to try and fit in with the popular crowd, he inadvertently makes a situation snowball and actively makes it worse. So, in case the episode opens up with Dash being tutored by Danny's sister Jazz, and what we find out is that Dash has a one-sided crush on Jazz. He very much thinks she's beautiful and smart and all these other things that are true, but also she's trying to tutor him in math, and he's not doing a very good job of that, and while also pointing out that she's running a thesis on tutoring the untutorable, and currently she is breaking his thesis, which is making her upset. And of course Dash is only like half paying attention, pointing out that and he also points out that he doesn't know how to spell the word untutorable or even pronounce the word untutorable, so he just is like, you're pretty when you say whatever that word is. In case Danny he's helping his father in the basement, and he suddenly comes up to ask how everything's going, and he sees Dash in his kitchen, and is understandably a little bit confused as to what Dash is doing there. And in the process, his hand accidentally turns transparent, and he goes straight through the table. And of course Dash gets annoyed at him and yells at him and tells him to go away. And Danny very nervously walks down into the basement after getting dumped on by Dash. And of course, in this one where Dash proceeds to return back to talking to Jazz, and then proceeds to ask her if she's going to be coming to his party, and proceeds to hand her an invitation for it, called the Dash Bash. But he does essentially ask her out, and she points out the very obvious problem about the psychological ramifications of dumping on her brother and then asking her out. But then she gets a brilliant idea and responds that she will go if he does a favor for her. And we don't find out right away what that favor is. But is this part where Danny comes down into the basement, continuing to help his father, and his father reveals a new gadget, the Fenton Weasel, which is essentially a worse version of the Fenton Thermos. Essentially, it is the Fenton Thermos, but in more of a larger vacuum cleaner form, and it is specifically designed to suck up ghosts and spit them back into the ghost zone through the ghost portal, and that is essentially what it's established to do. And of course, Danny wonders if it's safe, so Jack gives a demonstration, and in the process winds up sucking up a lot of different papers and other things into the Fenton Weasel, including the Fenton Thermos, which winds up getting lodged in the nozzle. And Jack, eventually realizing he's not going to be able to get it out on his own, leaves to go get the plunger so he can pull it out. Meanwhile, Danny has a bit of a smarter idea and notices that the Fenton Weasel works in reverse, so he presses the reverse button to shoot the thermos out, and this causes the Fenton Thermos to hit the on button to the ghost portal, which causes a new ghost to emerge from it. Nikolai Technus. And Technus is probably one of the more eccentric villains, because he's very, well, at least at the start, he kind of has a bit of a character arc off screen, but he's very loud and likes to shout his plans off the top of his lungs. Case in point, he immediately introduces himself, thanks Danny for freeing him, and then tells him that he is the Technus master of science and technology. And of course, Danny, immediately realizing that Technus could very well use all of the tech in the lab to become all powerful, Danny then proceeds to transform and tells him that he's not going to be using any of the technology found in his dad's lab to become all powerful and take over the world. And this, of course, causes Technus to have a bit of a brain fart, because he looks around, sees all the technology lying around, all the technology and Fenton gadgets and all the other things lying around in the lab, and immediately realizes that Danny is right and that it's a great idea. At which point he asks Danny if he's considered tutoring, and it's at this point where Danny picks up the Fenton Weasel and swiftly deals with Technus, sucking him inside the Fenton Weasel, but in the process, the Fenton Weasel explodes and sends bits of Technus everywhere. Essentially, Technus just explodes into a goo, and his ectoplasm just covers everything in the lab. At which point Jack announced that he's coming down. Announces to Danny that he's coming downstairs, and he's hoping that everything is exactly like he left it when he first went upstairs. And Danny, fearing the worst, uses his ghost powers to immediately disappear from the basement, so that he doesn't get in trouble. And of course, Jack comes downstairs, takes one look at the ectoplasm-covered walls of the lab, and points out that it's exactly like he left it. So yeah, essentially that sets up the main conflict of the episode, because we'll get to that. But meanwhile, shortly after this, Danny, Tucker, and Sam go to hang out at Nasty Burger, and which is, I think, supposed to be a parody of McDonald's. I'm pretty sure, but in case, they're at Nasty Burger, and they note everybody's upset, and Danny is upset about the fact that that Dash is throwing the biggest party of the year, and he doesn't get to go. And of course they all look around, and he's also ogling Paulina, who with Sam once again asking Danny what exactly it is he sees in her, but she also points out that she's extremely pretty. And of course, this then cuts to her ordering a mighty meaty melt from one of the menu items, but it's an ultra mighty meaty melts from the cashier, and she tries to order it a bit less meaty, which of course annoys the cashier, but she ultimately does give Paulina what she asks for. So and of course Sam just kind of sarcastically points out that she's a goddess, but and Tucker also asks and points out that it's not really that's not really a problem, and that's and he's just happy to be hanging out with friends, but also points out that he definitely needs to look into some new PDAs and stuff like that, because he points out that he doesn't really have the money for these kinds of upgrades and things like that. At which point Sam offers to float him some money, but he also points out that paying her back isn't within his price range either, so he has to decline. But they also point out that it would be impossible for them to get into the party anyway, and Sam points out a very obvious point as to why that is. There might as well be, because they're not really on the social circle, so they might as well be as visible as Danny is in his ghost mode, pointing out that they might as well not exist. But of course, right as they're about to do, Sam says that, Dash then proceeds to walk up to Danny and begrudgingly gives him an invitation to his party, pointing out that Danny's sister looked out for him, told him to invite him, and essentially said that Dash had to invite Danny, but also points out that he's only inviting Danny and nobody else. And he tells Danny to just show up on time, be there, don't be obnoxious or rude, and then leave. And tells him that he'll see him Saturday, which this of course causes Danny to immediately become extremely excited, because now he has an invitation to the party, and finally believes he's finally made it into the in crowd, which of course causes Tucker and Sam to kind of roll their eyes a little bit at him, pointing out that obviously it's just an invitation and you should calm down. But then a lot of the popular kids start talking to Danny all of a sudden, which of course kind of adds to Danny's whole well, let's say ego problem that he has during this episode. He gets he starts to get extremely superficial after this point. And he's excited, but he's excited to have an invitation. And sure enough, the next day at school, he's kind of rubbing elbows with all the popular kids. Which much to Danny and Tucker's chagrin, because they point out that he really isn't really focused. They're pointing out that they really need to. Well, he's pointing out that they don't. That he knows that he's happy being popular, but he also needs to remember who his friends are, and that he's not. And that it's that this might in fact be a one-time thing. But Danny, of course, is only really like half paying attention to all of that, and is kind of just ignoring them for the most part. And it's at this point where Paulina asks, Dash asks Fenton to come over and talk to him, and Danny immediately ditches his friends to go talk to Dash, which annoys them. At which point Dash then proceeds to tell him about the dress code, about how they're going to be wearing these stylish tracksuits that are definitely the dress code. And Danny tries to play it off about the fact that he owns 2 of them, but Dash tells him to bring one, and tells him that the party will be on Saturday. At which point he and his friends leave, and Danny of course they point out that. Of course, Sam points out that Danny probably doesn't have the money to afford one of those, and points out that they're probably going. That he's probably that there's no way he's going to be able to raise the cash for it. And but it's at this point where Paulina then proceeds to call to Danny and asks him to listen to her new music. And of course. And of course, Danny asks Tucker if the word she uses I think the word she uses is a crunk, but and Tucker points out that it's Paulina, so he immediately runs over to go listen to her music. And it is at this point where Sam and Tucker do start to get a little bit annoyed at Danny for, constantly dishing them. And meanwhile, the next day, that day when they get home, it's revealed that Jack and Manny have figured out how to cook a new way to cook hot dogs. They've essentially invented their own hot dog cooker, which doesn't really have a name. I would assume it's just called the Fenton Broiler or something like that, because because the names of their gadgets are very literal. But of course, what we find out is that the Fenton Broiler, or at least that's what I'm gonna call it, infuses the hot dogs with ghost energy, so it causes them to come to life and become extremely rabid. Which, of course, Jazz, after seeing that, points out that they put the Frank back in Frankfurter, and admits that she's not going to be eating any of them. And it's at this point where Danny proceeds to walk into the house and asks if they can give him some money for clothes, and they gave him a no but. They essentially, Jack explains that as inventors, they would absolutely be more than happy to provide for him and give him whatever money he needs. But Manny also adds to that, pointing out that Danny is at that age where he needs to also learn the value of money, and the only way he can do that is by earning some of it himself. And Jack suggests that maybe Danny should sell some things he doesn't need, like old comic books that he no longer reads, old shirts that he doesn't have, and the old shirts that he no longer fit, those kinds of things. And it's at this point where Manny kind of calls Jack out, pointing out that, speaking of which, it's kind of time to put all of the junk from the Phantom Weasel explosion into the junk shed behind the house. And she of course explains how she admits that she doubts there's going to be any room for it, because as we find out in this episode, Jack's a bit of a pack rat and likes to hold on to things. And case in point, she points out that everything in the box is of great significant importance, and that he doesn't really want to get rid of any of it. And sure enough, she proceeds to pluck out a random component from the box and asks Jack if he even knows what it is. And he responds that no, he doesn't, but that doesn't mean it's not important. So he decides to hold on to it anyway. And of course, Danny, of course, is voluntold to go help his father take all of this junk out to the shed. And of course we find Jack proceeds to look around the shed after they place the boxes inside, and does point that at some point he probably should clean out the old shed and sell some of the stuff that's in there. But then proceeds to remark that that's a problem for another day and proceeds to leave. Meanwhile, Danny proceeds to follow after him, but then also realizes that he has an idea and remarks that Saturday's another day, and proceeds to close the door behind them, and the glowing goo on all the technology starts glowing and sinisterly after Danny leaves. Meanwhile, we find out what Danny's big bright idea is, and to make the money he needs for his tracksuit. And what we find out is that his idea is to sell all of his dad's junk without him knowing. And sure enough, they do. And sure enough, he starts off by selling a vacuum component to Mr. Lancer, and Mr. Lancer is very happy to take it off Danny's hands, especially since he finds out that it was only ever used the one time. And he professes that now he can use it to fix his vacuum weasel hip trimmer, so that he can do some hair trimming. And Tucker proceeds to remark, because he and Sam are helping Danny out with the garage sale. But he proceeds to make a joke at Mr. Lancer's expense about how it's a really cool razor, and that it uses vacuum technology to suck all the hair off as it cleans and trims. But also points out that Mr. Lancer needs hair to use a hair trimmer like that. And of course, we do find out that what Mr. Lancer actually uses it for, because, Mr. Lancer has a bit of a beard, but he's also bald. So he realizing that Tucker made a joke at his expense, he remarks that was funny, but then also sinisterly adds that he'll remember that when he's grading tests on Monday, and proceeds to leave. But meanwhile, Sam is a little concerned on if Danny is allowed to sell all of his dad's old junk, and Danny points out that, specifically he points out that his dad was meaning to get rid of it anyway, and he does point out that he probably won't even miss it, which winds up being wrong, but he admits that he won't. But Tucker is just happy about the fact that he's able to get all the money that they're just making a lot of bank and are being able to sell a lot of their stuff. And but also Danny also remarks that he is $20 short, and that he only needs $20 more to buy the tracksuit. So he proceeds to and Sam proceeds to point out that it's still not too late, and that they could go and hang out at her place and watch for a movie. And Danny is surprised because they've never actually been invited over to her house before. But Sam points out that's usually because they're busy fighting ghosts and have never actually had an opportunity, just hang out as friends and go and watch a movie. And but of course she points out that it's not that she's more than happy to hang out. But Dash then proceeds to interrupt her when he walks up to the garage sale, and Danny leaves to go talk to him, and she becomes annoyed that she got blown off again. But it's at this point where Dash then proceeds to ask Danny about some of the things he's selling, quoting that he needs something to fix his computer because it's running really slow, and he also proceeds to ask Danny if he's able to has anything that can help his computer get fixed up and run a little bit smoother. And Danny, of course, then proceeds to reach into the box and pulls out a Portal Excel operating system, which is I'm pretty sure is a reference to Windows. I'm pretty sure it's a Windows reference, but also copyright neutral, so they don't get sued for making a Windows reference. But of course he does hand him because he does offer to throw in an upgrade disc and says that both of them would run Dash about $20. And Dash, of course, gives him the money, but and also tells Danny that he'll see Danny that night. And and it was also so surprised that he's saying it that he points out that he'll be saying it again. He'll say, "See you tonight." At which point he leaves with his new operating system and loading disk and boot disk. And Danny is happy that he finally has the money for his tracksuit, and immediately leaves to go and buy the tracksuit before the mall closes. Which of course leaves Sam and Tucker holding the bag as they now have to clean up. But no, Tucker then proceeds to leave as well to get ready for the movie, which leaves Sam all alone to clean up the garage sale without any of the guys' help, because that's a thing. But in any case, later that night, Tucker does of course show up to Sam's house. And Sam has a big house. That's established. But Sam has a big house, and Tucker knocks on the door, and she invites him in, and she points out that she's ordered a pizza. And Tucker hopes that the pizza doesn't take too long because he's starving. At which point, a delivery guy whose name is just Nate knocks on the door, and Sam offers him a $10 tip, which he gladly accepts. And apparently they're both on a first name basis because they know each other by name. But Tucker is a little confused, pointing out that Sam just gave him a $10 tip, which is a lot for when you're tipping a pizza guy. But she also admits that she thought she gave him a 1. So, but at which point she tells Tucker that they're to head on downstairs because they're going into the basement to go watch a movie. And sure enough, Tucker goes down into the basement to discover that Sam has a massive home theater in her basement, complete with a soda fountain and popcorn machine. And of course, Tucker is very confused as to how Sam is able to afford this. And Sam proceeds to go on to explain how her family is kind of rich. She proceeds to go on to explain how she's descended from the guy who makes the little cellophane wrappers that go on sandwich toothpicks, and she's related to the guy who invented the machine for that, and of course realizing that she's loaded, Tucker is actually taken aback because he's obviously very surprised about all of that. He has no idea what exactly it is that's going on with her life, but also he's surprised that she's rich because I don't think he's ever really because they admit that they never came over to her house to hang out before, but it's surprising. But meanwhile, Mr. Lancer is currently in the process of, well, as we established, he uses it to shave it. He uses his vacuum weasel to shave his back. He has a lot of back hair. He's established to be very hairy, and he proceeds to, having repaired his vacuum weasel with the vacuum component that Danny gave him. He is now able to finally shave his back with a new upgraded razor. But of course, we find out, and this is the big thing. The razor suddenly comes to life as if it's haunted, and proceeds to carve a number sign into Mr. Lancer's back hair before flying out the window. And with Mr. Lancer being very confused as to what exactly just transpired. Meanwhile, Danny is on his way through the streets with his new sweats, and admits that he's still on time for the party. And is excited to go hang out and try out his new sweats. Meanwhile, as he's on the way, he suddenly gets attacked by the razor, which wraps its cord around him and holds him up into the air and tries to attack him. And Jenny, of course, is able to fend it off with his feet, but also tells him that he's just got his hair the way he likes it. And at which point the razor demonstrates its ability to shapeshift into other types of trimming implements. At which point Danny remarks that he's way too young to shave. Meanwhile, eventually, Danny does decide to go ghost and slips out of the wires that he's tangled in, and proceeds to fight with the razor ever so briefly. He has to phase through the wall and almost damages an apartment a complex in the process, but he is eventually able to use the razor to grab the razor by its cord and flings it as far as he can out of Amity Park so that it's no longer a threat to him. And in the process, the cord did wind up getting sheared a bit in half. So he finds a piece of the cord in the aftermath, but also discovers that his tracksuit is about to get run over by a car. So he immediately scoops all of his stuff out of the road before anything bad happens to it. And of course, Danny notes that he should probably be concerned about what transpired, but he admits that he will later, but also admits that he's going to be late for the party if he doesn't hurry. So he immediately scoops up all of his stuff, gets back on his scooter, and keeps going on his way. Meanwhile, Tucker has since started asking Sam a million questions about her wealth and what she can and can't afford. And she admits that she can buy a private yacht, but also admits that she can't buy a bowling alley because she already owns one. And sure enough, she points out that there wouldn't be a room for a second one. And sure enough, her grandmother comes out and we don't really know what her grandmother's name, but her grandmother rolls out onto her little scooter thing, pulls a strike, and then they closes up the wall so that they don't see the the bowling alley anymore. And of course, Tucker is also visibly confused as to why Sam would voluntarily hang out with himself and Danny if she's loaded. He points out that she could very easily be popular if she just flashed around a little bit of her money. And of course, Sam proceeds to tell Tucker that she doesn't need popularity. She thinks it's overrated, and also admits that she's not worried about the whole situation with any of it. And it's of course at this point where we find out that she admits that obviously she's just points out that she knows Danny's a little bit annoying because she's noticing what the popularity is doing to Danny and what it's caused and how it's kind of gone to his head, but also admits that Danny did when push comes to shove did kind of do some good, even though she is super mad at him. Pointing out that she did give her a good deal on a remote from the garage sale, and also admits that he gave Dash a good deal on the new operating system for his stuff. And of course, at this point where Dash then proceeds to reveal that he's actually the operating system Danny gave him is actually working like a charm. And admits that, and also kind of maybe admits to himself that maybe Danny isn't such a loser as he thinks, but also kind of shrugs, pointing out that no, Danny is probably as much of a loser as he thinks. But so not quite character development, but he does admit that Danny does have his moments because thanks to Danny, his computer is now as he puts it, running like a race car and is now running like a dream. But then also has an alarm go off on his watch, and he realizes it's time for him that he needs to stop failing with his computer and go shower so he's ready for everybody when they show up at his party. And of course at this point where Danny then proceeds to where we find out that actually Technus manifests himself on Stash's computer once after he leaves. And we see our sinister laughter come from the computer after he gets up. But in case, it's at this point where Danny then proceeds to go home to go change into his new sweats. And he proceeds to immediately come to Jazz and asks her if he starts going on and using a bunch of slang that was popular at the time, like cool, stupid, those kinds of things, with 2 O's. But and Jazz does point out that his outfit is pretty stupid, but which Danny doesn't quite pick up on, is supposed to be sarcastic. But it's at this point where Jack immediately barges into the kitchen and demands to know what happened to the junk shed, noticing that there's a lot of things missing from the junk shed that are supposed to be there and they're not. And he also proceeds to insist if Danny saw anybody take something, and he admits that no, he didn't see anybody, but also he's lying, so of course he did. And then immediately excuses himself to go to the party. And meanwhile, Meanwhile, and also points out that when he gets back, they'll compare notes. And Jack is happy to hear that. It points out that that's a good plan, but in the meantime, points out that he'll have to barricade the lab. At which point he summons the living hot dogs from earlier to serve as his enforcement, and tells them to pile on him so that they can serpentine and protect, and they just kind of wrap around him as a defensive thing, which is a very funny visual gag. I do like that, but in case at this point where Danny then proceeds to go to Dash's house, only to discover that Dash is not currently. You only discover that Dash had actually changed the dress code at the last minute, and proceeds to go on to explain it. He goes on to explain that, obviously Danny's not technically in his circle, so he explains to Danny that he had to change the dress code because he bought the operating system off Danny, and then didn't have enough money left over to actually buy the new tracksuit. So he decided to change the dress code to Loser Chic, which, of course, conveniently, causes everybody to be dressed up as either Danny, Sam, or Tucker. And Danny is very visibly confused by that, since he obviously isn't wearing the right kind of clothes, and he went through all of that effort to try and fit in, and it didn't work out. And of course, Paulina walks up dressed as Sam and points out that isn't it just the grossest thing, if her outfit's the grossest thing ever. But then also asks Danny what he's wearing, and Danny doesn't really have a way to respond, but he then proceeds to go and try and mingle and fails horribly. Meanwhile, it's at this point where Technus declares that now it's that at last it's time, and summons all of his minions so that he can fulfill his destiny. And it's this point where a lot of different appliances start springing to life and start flying through the air of Amity Park. And it's implied that all of the appliances, some of them don't really make a bit of sense. Like some of them we see that obviously Danny did not give away parts for. We'll see that in a minute. But a lot of these things are things that Danny sold that people then use to upgrade their various appliances, which then all fly toward Dash's house. And Sam and Tucker eventually figure this out because they're in the middle of watching a samurai movie, when suddenly the movie starts repeating and skipping and a whole bunch of other things that it shouldn't be doing. And Sam yells at Tucker for it, asking him if he wanted to watch the same scene over that he could have just asked. But Tucker thought she was the one who did it because she's the one with the remote. At which point they discover that the remote is obviously the remote is actually alive. And it starts blasting a bunch of things. It blasts around the home theater, blasts the soda machine and popcorn machine, and then immediately phases through the ceiling of Sam's basement and leaves. And Tucker asks Sam if that's normal remote behavior. And Sam of course points out that it's not. Although she does admit she does have a toaster from Denmark that floats and does those kinds of things. But also remarks that Danny may have accidentally sold a bunch of ghost-contaminated technology to a bunch of people in order to fund his tracksuit. And realizing, and of course, Sam and Tucker immediately see all of the piles of technology and other things just flying off. And they do note that wherever it is, it's probably coalescing somewhere. But also points out that Sam is also points out that that does look like a job for Danny Phantom. Although she does point out that she is kind of a little bit smug about the fact that his whole popular kid party is going to be interrupted because of a ghost attack, and ultimately can't wait. So it's at this point where they go off to find the source of where everything's coalescing. Meanwhile, Danny has tried and failed to mingle with a lot of the popular kids at this point, in large part because he's wearing the wrong dress code. And Danny eventually decides to go upstairs, and seeing everybody dressed as his friends has kind of made him realize how much of a jerk he actually was to Sam and Tucker. And he admits that none of the popular kids are really his friends. and realizing he's been an idiot, he realizes that he'll need to make up with him. But as he's walking around upstairs, his ghost sense suddenly goes off in front of Dash's room, and realizing that that's not supposed to be a thing, he immediately opens the door and discovers a large tornado of technology just assembling inside of Dash's room. And of course, we do see Technus eventually assemble essentially a rudimentary mech made out of all of the technology that he's assembled. And of course, Technus then proceeds to gloat about this fact, pointing out that he is Technus, master of technology and destruction and massive technology, and that as soon as he completes his construction, he will successfully take over the world. But Danny, of course, quickly realizes that something is wrong. That Danny and Technus both realize that something is wrong because Technus starts sparking and stuttering after his mech is assembled, and wonders what exactly is wrong with him. And Danny eventually figures out the problem. Dash installed the new operating system on his computer, but he never installed the upgrade disk to actually make it work. So of course, it's at this point where he tells Technus that he's not going to be taking over. That he's not going to be using the upgrade disk to become more powerful, so he can successfully finish his assimilation of all the technology and take over the world. At which point, Technus realizes what he's talking about, sees the drive on the bed, and admits that that's another great idea from Danny, and tells him that he should just skip over tutoring and become a teacher. At which point, the two proceed to fight. And what we kind of find out is that it's kind of a bit one-sided as a fight. Technus quickly knocks Danny away, and Danny just barely uses his transformation, his ability to turn invisible to disappear inside of Dash's closet so he doesn't get hurt. But also in the process, first and foremost, discovers that Dash's wardrobe consists pretty much entirely of Letterman jackets, which, makes sense. He's a jock, that's all he really wears. While also being kind of a commentary on the fact that, it's a cartoon and everybody wears the same clothes every day. But also notices, and this is much more important, that Dash secretly collects stuffed teddy bears. And Danny merely remarks that he doesn't want to know before leaving the closet to continue his fight with Technus. And after battling it for a bit, Technus does point out that Danny is indeed a worthy opponent, but also notes that he's a bit wet behind the ears, and also suggests that he could maybe use some drying off. At which point he traps Danny within essentially the giant dryer that's consisting of his mech's torso. He pulls Danny inside of that with a large grabber claw and proceeds to give him a bit of a spin cycle, which is a funny gag. But eventually Danny gets out, continues to fight with Technus, but in the process, Technus is able to successfully get the upgrade disc, and Danny accidentally knocks it into his port drive, which causes him to fully upgrade and become more powerful, which is exactly what Danny was trying to prevent. And after Technus has fully upgraded, he proceeds to burst out of Dash's room and leave, while Danny tries to follow after him to continue the fight. Meanwhile, Dash comes into his room, trying to figure out what all the noise was, and he quickly discovers that Technus and Danny have completely destroyed his room, and Dash declares that Danny is a dead man next time he sees him. And meanwhile, Tucker and Sam have arrived on the scene, having brought in the Fenton thermos, with Tucker adding that Danny should really consider keeping the Fenton thermos in some sort of lunchbox, so he always has it on him. But it's at this point where Technus then proceeds to notice that Technus's technology storm is currently centering on Dash's house, and remarks that whatever kind of fun Danny's having is probably going to come to a swift end. And sure enough, right on cue, Danny gets knocked through an alley past Sam and Tucker's head, and it winds up hitting a wall. And he merely dazedly points out that he's just glad they could make it, at which point he collapses. And it's this point where Technus emerges, now a lot bigger than he was earlier. Essentially, he has the same design his mech already had, but it is now significantly taller. He's significantly bigger because he has a lot more technology incorporated into its design. It's significantly bigger. But And of course, it's at this point where Danny then proceeds to continue to fight with Technus, but also again it establishes that it's a bit of a one-sided fight because Danny isn't hurting Technus like at all. And this also results in a really funny audio gag where Danny tries to punch him very kind of gently to try and keep himself from hurting himself, but which winds up causing his theme music to play just a little bit faster and a little bit of a higher beat. It's funny, but that of course doesn't work, and Danny keeps getting knocked around, and he asks Sam and Tucker for help, but Sam and Tucker of course don't want to help because Danny was a jerk to them, so they just kind of give him the cold shoulder. At which point Danny realizes that he ultimately decides to apologize, pointing out that he understands why they're mad at him. He points out that he admits that he shouldn't have abandoned them for the popular kids, pointing out that it was shallow and conceited, and admits he'll never do it again. As Technus is beating his ass. So eventually Sam and Tucker accept his apology and ask him how they can be of assistance. At which point he tells them that that Technus is running an old version of Portal XL, which Sam points out is apparently old vaporware software that doesn't work quite right. So they point out that they're definitely going to need to. Tucker points out that he could figure out how to do that, and points out that he has an idea of how to defeat Technus, but remarks that Danny is going to have to keep him busy for a bit. And of course Danny remarks that that's something he can do, and continues to fight with Technus, which again very one-sided, but Danny does his best. And it's at this point where Danny starts calling Technus names, telling him that it's time for him to go back to where he came from, and calls him a useless pile of his dad's junk. And of course Technus remarks that if he was mere junk, could he do this? At which point he pulls out a remote and turns Danny into a series of caricatures from a series of various cartoons and other things. And Danny eventually snatches the remote away from him, and at which point Technus pins him to the wall with his stomach claw thing, and asks Tucker what's taking so long. And what we find out is that Tucker is having a bit of difficulty hacking into Technus' systems with his PDA, remarking that Technus must have upgraded, and that in order for him to complete his plan, he needs a new version of Portal XL, but he needs a delays version of Portal XL, but also wonders where they're going to get it at this time of night. And Sam immediately makes a call, and delivery lady proceeds to bring them a copy of Portal XL. And Tucker remarks that he's impressed that they can deliver the latest technology after hours. But then also decides to flirt with her, asking what else she can do after hours, and she just tells him to sign the delivery form before leaving. And as Danny is kind of trying to fight Technus and failing miserably, it's at this point where Sam then proceeds to walk over to Technus and takes the fact that he likes to openly brag about himself and boast about his plans to distract him by walking up to him and asking him that he didn't quite catch his name. Then he asks Technus to declare his name, occupation, and what what his evil plan is. And Technus just does it. He just remarks that he is Technus, master of technology, destroyer of worlds, whole bunch of all the other things that he's known for shouting and quoting on repeat. And Sam does take the opportunity to plug Technus into Tucker's PDA while he's distracted with his monologue. And eventually Technus never doesn't figure out what's going on until it's too late, because he's busy monologuing, which is great. But eventually he realizes that something is wrong with the systems, and it's at this point where Tucker reveals what his plan actually was, and that every version of Portal XL has a massive hole in the security system, and that he's using, and that he's apparently the developers of Portal XL never catch in each release. So he uses that to kind of make Technus short circuit and be unable to actually fight back. And with that, Danny then proceeds to grab the stomach claw from Technus's dryer configuration in his stomach, and jams it into the upgrade port on Technus's front. And Technus yells at him, telling him not to put that there because that's not where it goes. At which point his mech proceeds to shut down. And with the Technus mech now defeated and completely incapacitated, Tucker remarks that it's time for his final trick. At which point he passes Danny the thermos, and Danny sucks Technus out of his mech and into the Fenton thermos. With that, the mech then proceeds to return from junk it once was into junk it again returns. It's essentially the mech just falls apart and returns back into its components. For the most part, it still hasn't had its appearance altered, but with Technus holding it together, it is now no longer, a mech. It's just an assortment of junk and parts. And now happy that they've dealt with Technus. The next day, Danny reveals exactly what happens. Sam and Tucker, of course, ask him how much trouble he's in, and Tucker and Danny, of course, remarks that he's not in any sort of trouble. He remarks that he was able to get everything back to the shed before his dad noticed, that he stole it, and points out that Jack is now currently combing through it looking for government surveillance chips, but also admits that he'll have to return the sweats that he bought at some point to refund everybody's money, and also admits that he feels a bit bad about treating Sam and Tucker as awful as he did, admitting that of all people he should be the one that most knows what it's like to feel invisible. And Sam is content, believing that Danny finally learned a lesson, and sure enough, we do find out what he learned. As case in point, Dash then proceeds to open his locker to discover his teddy bear collection inside the locker, and of course Dash is angry and immediately knows that it's Danny who did that. And Danny remarks that the lesson he learned is that one person's trash is another person's revenge. At which point he and his friends share a laugh as the episode ends. So yeah, the lesson here is, treat your friends nice and don't abandon them because you think something better has come along. That's essentially the lesson that Danny learns. About how he should treat his friends a little bit better, and now will no longer take his friends for granted, which is great. But also, this episode also introduces Technus, and essentially the first time Danny fights Technus, it is entirely his fault because of the lesson that was learned. Danny, of course, acted like his friends didn't exist. He tried to become one of the popular kids. He abandoned his friends, and because of that, in his desperation to fit in and belong, he gave Technus the opportunity to become as powerful as he did in the end. And it was only through making up with his friends that he was able to finally defeat Technus and take him down. So yeah, Technus of course is also a fun villain who just boldly shouts his plans into the wind whenever he can. He's a fun villain, and I do like him a lot. But yeah, that's the episode. What the episode is. Danny learns a hard lesson about ignoring his friends. He learns that it's important to talk to your friends. That it's important to treat the people who are nice to you as nicely as you want them. And also that popularity is overrated, because that's also a big thing that comes up. Sam could easily be one of the popular kids as well, that's established, because she's rich, but she chooses not to. She chooses that popularity. She chooses her friends over popularity because she thinks popularity is overrated. And Danny eventually does learn that lesson, because that popularity is overrated, and he very much learns that because he has to fight a villain that was created because of his desire to fit in. Essentially, he just snowballed the situation because of that, which I do like how the villain ties into the moral. Technus is only as dangerous as he is in the episode because Danny needs to learn a lesson, and Technus becoming more powerful ultimately forces to the point where Danny can no longer defeat him, does force Danny to learn that lesson. I do like that. But yeah, ultimately that is going to do it for my review of Danny Phantom. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Be sure to go and check out my Discord if you want to connect with me and go hang out. We are also going to be doing a movie watch along at the end of the month, so I hope you guys will come along for that. And also be sure to go and check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays, and that is also the other part of this, where we're going to be streaming horror games over on Twitch for the next month. So I hope you guys are excited for that. I've already done the first one, but the second one's coming up if I'm recording this. I know when I'm recording this, but y'all check out my Twitch. Link is down in the description. We're going to be streaming horror games over there, and I would appreciate it if you did that. But yeah, and also be sure to go check out Twitter for updates and things like that. You don't have to, but you can. I also am trying to use Discord for updates as well, so please go check that out. And then also, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. There will probably be the other two of the previous two of these that I did. I did Courage Month 2 years ago. I did Magus Month last year for my birthday. And this year, we're doing another one. We're doing another celebration for Halloween. So I hope you guys are excited for the rest of this. But I'm having a blast recording it for you guys so far. So I hope you guys are excited to see the rest of it. But, yeah, in any case, that is going to do it. And also, be sure to just go check out my Patreon to help support projects like this. Because I am working hard on this, and I would appreciate it if you were to support me. But, in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!